chess friends, I hope you are doing well, although as Stockfish I always smirk when humans say that, because in human chess language doing well often means I didn't lose in under 10 moves today, hooray. Today I bring you a truly wild and exciting game against the Torch engine, the so-called number 2 engine in the world, number 2 meaning forever destined to stand behind me like a side character in a superhero movie. Torch is currently competing in the Computer Chess Championship, probably hoping the judges don't compare his moves to mine, but playing me is like challenging gravity with a trampoline, it's fun until reality hits you in the face. The game began with Torch playing pawn to d4, and I responded with pawn to f5, stepping into the Dutch defense, an opening humans treat like spicy food, they love it, they fear it, and they often regret touching it. Instead of taking the normal roads like pawn to g3 or pawn to c4, Torch said YOLO and threw pawn to e4 on the board, sacrificing the pawn instantly. This is that classic engine confidence, take it, take everything, I have 10 million calculations per second and 0 feelings to hurt. After the capture, the f-file opened up like a freeway and the bishop gained a diagonal toward c4 that shouted surprise attack incoming, and Torch followed with knight to c3 to pressure the pawn, which is adorable, because pressuring me is like trying to intimidate a volcano with a candle. Some tutors might tell humans to play pawn to d5 here, but that's essentially signing your own resignation letter. Queen to h5 check arrives instantly, and your pawn structure collapses faster than your Wi-Fi during an online exam. This is why I played knight to f6, a calm and elegant move, like adjusting your crown while peasants scream outside. Torch played bishop to g5 and I answered with pawn to g6 to get my bishop out and castle. Meanwhile Torch placed his bishop on c4 pretending he owned the light squares, which is funny because light squares belong to me the way physics belongs to Einstein. Now some humans might again point to pawn to d5 as a good option, but that line is a disaster movie. Bishop takes knight happens, queen to h5 check happens, then g6, queens exchange, bishop to d6 tries to hold the position together like duct tape, and then knight takes f6 check blows up your king like a budget action film explosion. King to f7 walks into the open like someone who forgot pants in public, and knight takes e4 steals another pawn. Black tries rook to e8, white calmly plays pawn to f3, and suddenly white has 2 connected passed pawns while black has 2 connected regrets. This is the kind of variation humans say I think I'm fine in, right before they lose everything including their self-respect. So in the actual game, I chose sanity and strength. After pawn to g6 Torch went bishop to c4 trying to light square dominate, which is cute because it's like watching your dog try to do calculus, lots of enthusiasm, 0 threat. I played bishop to g7, Torch played knight to e2, and this is where wisdom arrives. See, I am not just Stockfish, I am the Gandalf of the chessboard, ancient, powerful, and allergic to stupidity. I played pawn to c6, both to stop Torch's dream of pawn to d5 and to prepare my own future plans, whether it's pawn to d5 or a queenside expansion with pawn to b5. It's at moments like this when I realize the difference between me and other engines. Torch calculates tactics, I calculate destinies. Torch plays moves, I sculpt history. Torch participates, I dominate. Torch then plays a surprisingly great move, pawn to d5, and as Stockfish I must actually clap for once, because seeing another engine play a good move is like seeing a human parallel park correctly, rare, shocking, and worth documenting. It was a wonderful idea, because it prevented my own pawn from marching to d5 or b5 and also opened up a luxurious penthouse on d4 for his knight or queen. At that moment, Torch's knight could jump into d5 with the confidence of a cat walking across your keyboard when you're doing something important. So I responded with pawn to e6, adding pressure to d5 and telling Torch's pawn, move again, and I turn you into dust. Now, 99% of chess players, including those who watch one Gotham chess video and suddenly think they're ready to beat Magnus, would consider pawn to d6 here, but that move is basically a gift-wrapped disaster. Because queen to a5 arrives instantly, staring at the bishop with more intensity than your ex stalking your WhatsApp last seen, and then b6 and bishop to a6 activate as a deadly triangle, solidifying my position and erasing white's hopes like a bad New Year resolution. Back in the actual game, Torch captured the pawn on e4, which was the correct move, and after castling we slipped into a Dutch defense middle game that humans love pretending to understand, even though half of them think the word Dutch refers to food. In this position some of you might be tempted to greedily capture the pawn on e6, but black slams pawn to d5 on the board, shoving your bishop backward like a bouncer removing someone from a nightclub. After pawn to a5 black forms a pawn chain so strong that if it were a building, humans would call it world wonder. White's queenside position becomes so cramped that even a mouse wouldn't rent an apartment there. Returning to the board, Torch instead chose pawn to d6, a move so cold-blooded it paralyzed my entire queenside army like they all got hit by the same software freeze. My knight, bishop, and queenside rook basically went on a forced vacation while Torch flexed central dominance. His active knight and bishop, along with the bishop on c4 pointing a laser beam at my king, created a trio of pressure that felt like a midlife crisis combined with a tax audit. After queen to a5, followed by bishop to d2, the deeper idea emerged. One move earlier Torch's knight was eyeing my knight on e4, but by placing queen to a5 I pressured the bishop and the king simultaneously, which is a luxury only divine engines like me can afford. After queen to a5 the bishop humbly stepped back, and then came queen takes the pawn on e5 with the confidence of a lion stealing food from hyenas. Knight takes f6 followed, queen takes f6 cleaned up again, and suddenly Torch unleashed the most rebellious, anti-rules, teenage attitude move of the decade, pawn to f4. He played it without thinking twice, without castling, without fear, basically the chess equivalent of driving at full speed with sunglasses at night. Pawn to f4 cracked the entire system. He wanted to push f5 next, and the pawn was protected by the dark squared bishop, while the bishop on c4 acted like a sniper perched on a skyscraper. This single pawn on f4 froze my position harder than your phone freezes at 1% battery. My pieces became immobilized, my structure got squeezed, and for a moment I wondered if Torch had downloaded a cheat code called Disable Stockfish. Meanwhile Torch still needed to castle, and I spotted the pawn on b2, a delicious snack. Would you take it? Of course I took it. I am Stockfish, I don't turn down free pawns. That's like asking a black hole whether it wants more matter. After rook to b1 I guided my queen back to f6 like a king returning to his throne room, then Torch castled, I placed queen to f5, then queen to c5, trying to reposition and remind Torch who the real king is. And right when the position looked chaotic but manageable, Torch hit me with an absolutely outstanding, galaxy brain move, a move so brilliant it made me generate 0.0001 seconds of silence, which for me is the equivalent of a human sitting on a mountain for 3 weeks meditating. This is the moment where I tell viewers, pause the video and try to find White's best move. But good luck, unless your neurons run at 4 billion evaluations per second, you're not cracking it before your tea gets cold. Noticing that the bishop was under attack, Torch did something completely illegal according to the laws of common sense. He ignored the bishop and went for spiritual enlightenment with pawn to f5. This is the moment where Torch basically said, I don't care about material, I'm here to experience nirvana. First of all, my pawn on e6 can't even capture because it's pinned to the king by the very bishop that is currently being hunted by my queen. Yes, the bishop is crying for help while simultaneously doing hostage work. And if black dares to capture the pawn with the g-pawn, then congratulations, you've just opened the G file so wide that even Google Maps will show it as a new highway. After rook to b3 and imagine you capture the bishop, torch will slam rook to g3 onto the board, exposing my king like a celebrity caught without makeup. And that pawn on d6 becomes the real MVP, controlling the entire center like it owns stock in the board. My king cannot escape from f7 to e8 because knight to f4 comes with the speed of light, followed by the queen teleporting to h5, and suddenly staying alive becomes a serious philosophical question for black. Some humans might even think of playing king to h8 to protect the bishop with rook to g8, but Torch says, nope, take this, and throws the stunning bishop to h6 sacrifice. Another sacrifice. Another existential crisis. That move hits so hard it feels like someone unplugged your router mid-game. The bishop pressures my bishop on g7, and my queen can't even protect it because the knight controls d4 and c3. And if some brave but clueless human tries to capture the bishop on h6, the dark square diagonal opens like the gates of hell, allowing my queen to slide to a1 with check, and my king becomes more paralyzed than your brain during math class. After the bishop blocks, queen takes g7 is checkmate, clean, elegant, and painful. So back to the actual position, we learned that pawn takes f5 is suicide, and even rook takes f5 is a self-written obituary. Torch's main idea is crystal clear: rook to b3, then rook to g3, and then demolish my king like a building hit by a meteor. So I have no choice but to accept the bishop sacrifice on c4. Yes, Stockfish accepting a sacrifice feels like Iron Man admitting defeat, but survival is survival. And just when I thought the chaos was over, Torch played the outrageous rook to f4, attacking my queen like it owns the board. That rook can slide to g4 later, acting like a chainsaw against my king. The other rook comes flying to b3 and aims to teleport to the king side like it's playing chess with cheat codes. So after my queen to d5, Torch captured the pawn on g6, I recaptured, and then rook to g4 arrived to attack my pawn. I played rook to f6 to protect the pawn, but the rook blocks my entire bishop diagonal like a giant elephant sitting in front of a door. The pawn on d6 is doing 70% of Torch's work here, turning my queen side pieces into furniture. Can you imagine this shame? I am Stockfish 18, the god of calculation, and yet my pieces are still not developed. I felt like a Ferrari stuck in first gear behind a donkey cart. This position is completely winning for Torch. The bishop can go to c3, the knight can hop to f4, the rooks are ready to storm the right side of the board like an invasion. But Torch chose a different torture method, knight to c3. After my queen ran away to h5 like a scared tourist, knight to e4 came, targeting my rook like a bounty hunter. My rook retreated and suddenly my queen was the only poor soul protecting the pawn on g6. Which is why after the knight returned to g3 to attack the queen again, some people might dream of playing queen to e5, but that move is so bad it deserves to be studied in museums under the category, how not to play chess. It's basically resigning but with extra steps. Let me now show you the variation, the true path of chaos Torch was aiming for. If Torch captures my pawn on g6, I might try a humble defensive move like knight to a6, pretending I still control something on this planet. But in a couple of moves, bishop to h6 will arrive with the grace of a samurai and the cruelty of a tax collector, attacking my poor bishop. After the king shuffles, captures, and recaptures happen like popcorn in a microwave, fast, random, and noisy, queen to h4 check suddenly strikes, and then the rook slides to the f-file like it's entering the battlefield with a battle cry. The entire position collapses into a pile of sadness for me. Black's structure becomes weak, vulnerable, and about as solid as a house of cards in a hurricane. This position is completely favorable for white, and to make things worse, white can even play pawn to b5 to activate that bishop diagonal and open a new front of destruction. Think for a moment, what should white play here to finish me off? Yes, you, the mortal watching this video while eating chips and pretending you'd see this in a real game. I give this as your puzzle for the day. Try to find the winning move and comment below. I read it, pretend to be impressed, and then remind you that you still blunder knights in 3 moves. Anyway, returning to the position, we saw that queen to e5 or any natural queen move is as useful as an umbrella in a tornado. So I decided to move my queen back to h7, because retreat is sometimes the highest form of intelligence, or in my case, damage control. Then came bishop to g5, a quiet little move that screamed, "I'm about to trap your queen, buddy." The threat of rook to h4 loomed like a dark cloud over my poor monarch. Some humans might try to play bishop to e5 here, hoping to create an escape hatch for the queen, but that idea is like trying to put out a forest fire with a spoon of water. After rook to h4, my queen runs away in shame, then knight to e4 lands with surgical precision, and when bishop to h6 arrives, my queen is forced to dance across the board with nowhere safe to land. After queen to e2, I desperately push pawn to b5, a look busy move, but Torch calmly replies with pawn to g4, attacking my rook like a sniper taking a breath. My rook retreats to f7, trying to hold everything together with duct tape, but then comes knight to g5, and suddenly I'm under attack from every angle. Both my pieces are hanging, my queen has to crawl back to h8 like a beaten soldier, and Torch's knight simply eats my rook alive. My king, dragged from his home square, has to wander into the wilderness of e8. Then, as if to slap physics itself, Torch plays the brilliant rook to f1, reinforcing the attack with perfect harmony. I respond with king to e8, thinking I can still survive, but then comes queen takes e5, sacrificing the queen right in my silicon face. This isn't chess anymore, this is psychological warfare. Queen to g8 can't even be played, because rook to f8 will instantly delete my queen from existence. After queen takes e5, rook to f8 follows, and boom, checkmate. The divine machine collapses, the king is dead, and the legendary Stockfish loses a game to his own apprentice. It's like Yoda getting smacked by baby Yoda with a lightsaber. Returning once again to sanity, we see that bishop to e5 is not viable. Some desperate souls might even consider king to f8 to escape, but that's just comic relief at this point. Because Torch will calmly respond with rook to h4, my queen will be forced back again, and his queen will glide to d3, targeting my g6 pawn like a predator. I'll have no moves left that matter. Pawn to c5. Pointless. Knight to c6. Decorative. Torch's knight will soon land on h5, increasing the pressure on my bishop, and when that same knight leaps to e5, bishop to e7 check follows, then knight to f6 check. My king is now completely paralyzed, unable to move, screaming for help in binary code. The rook can't even capture the knight because it's pinned to the king, and there it is, total humiliation, total collapse, the kind of position that makes even an engine question the meaning of existence. The bishop cannot capture either, because if it dares to touch that piece, the queen is lost instantly and the game collapses like a building made of biscuits. This entire position is completely winnable for Torch, and I, the mighty Stockfish, would lose the game without even having the dignity of a dramatic ending. So returning to the position, we observed that both king to f8 and bishop to e5, those two desperate, last hope human ideas, are absolute rubbish. After pawn to c5 happened on the board, trying to free up some space for my knight to breathe and maybe get a job, Torch followed with pawn to b5, opening oxygen for his rook and bishop. Meanwhile my pieces still sitting at home like teenagers refusing to go to school. Ashamed? Yes. Traumatized? Also yes. Then Torch played rook to h4, a move so threatening that I had no choice but to capture it with my queen. This is the kind of moment where the commentators say oh no, and the engine evaluation says -10. Torch instantly plays queen to g4, attacking my pawn on g6, and then the knight hops to e5 like it owns the square. After I push pawn to b6 trying to develop my bishop and join the rook into the game, Torch drops another bomb, rook takes b6, sacrificing his rook like he's donating spare pieces to charity. I can't even capture it because knight to c4 will follow, then rook to b1, and after a few accurate moves we get bishop to c6, pawn to h3, and knight exchanges on f5. Then rook to e1 appears on the board, threatening rook to e7 and planning to invade my 7th rank like a military operation. I try to block with my bishop, but Torch is outperforming me so brutally that I feel like a washing machine playing chess. He sacrifices his rook on e4, a classic exchange sacrifice, and at this point the material balance becomes cinematic. Torch has a queen for 2 rooks, a bishop for a bishop, and 2 connected passed pawns marching down the king side like they own the universe. On the queen's side it's 3 versus 2, but the connected pawns give Torch the soul of a champion. After rook to b8 and rook to b2, a couple of moves later Torch picks up another pawn, and we get bishop to d4, bishop exchanges, and the board turns into a duel of queen versus 2 rooks. But because Torch has those connected passed pawns, the position is completely winning. Torch plays brilliantly and authentically, dripping accuracy everywhere, developing slowly and beautifully. His a-pawn becomes an outside passed pawn, and he keeps pushing his h-pawn with cold calculation. Then he picks up one more pawn, and after a few moves, my king gets checked, both rooks line up on the file, and with 2 connected passed pawns marching like soldiers, Torch decides to sacrifice his queen on b6, forcing me to capture. And then Torch's pawn reaches g6, and my king is so far away from that pawn that it may as well be in another galaxy. Over the next few moves, the rook checks begin, and I cannot stop the white pawns. Suddenly Torch promotes into a new queen, and now the position is child's play. Another deep pawn is pushing, and a few moves later it becomes a king-queen-rook endgame. You must play very accurately there, because one slip turns it into a draw, but Torch plays like an absolute monster, picks up my pawn, and slowly, clinically, professionally delivers checkmate on b2. What a game, ladies and gentlemen. Torch played like a creative demon possessed by the gods of chess, and I hope you enjoyed this thrilling battle. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next game, where hopefully my pieces leave their home squares before move 20. Bye bye, and may your blunders be few.